fellow members, I wish you all a very warm welcome. Please join me for another episode of The Fact, the series that discusses political international issues every week. Today we have two respected guests, James Carey from USA, who is a political analyst and editor in Geopolitical Alert, and we have also Tesha Teshanovic from Serbia, who is a political activist. Mr. Carey, would you please tell us about the reason behind Trump's impeachment? What are the goals that political groups seek by this move?
The impeachment of Donald Trump started, obviously, over this phone call with the Ukrainian president, in which Trump is, he was alleged to have said he was going to withhold arms to Ukraine if they refused to start an investigation into Joe Biden and his son Hunter, who had, had, without any qualifications or anything, had been put in charge of some natural gas resources in Ukraine, which, the complaint with Donald Trump was, well, this was a quid pro quo, but Donald Trump claims he was, getting the Ukrainian authorities to investigate a quid pro quo as far as Joe Biden goes. But for the most part, this was a political show by the Democrats, who we've seen over the last couple of years, starting with the election of Donald Trump to begin with the whole Russiagate narrative and the whole fake news thing, all these attempts to try to remove Trump and pretend that he was some abnormality in the United States, as if he wasn't a result of the actual system we live under and, the failure of neoliberal policies of the last 30, 40 years. And, first they started with the Russiagate thing, and then obviously that went into the Mueller probe, and the Mueller probe produced really nothing. So the Democrats moved on to impeachment, and they made it very narrowly focused, obviously, because the Democrats are, like Joe and Hunter Biden, the Democrats are guilty of a lot of the same crimes that Donald Trump does when it comes to corruption, owning businesses while being in office, and simple things like that you could easily impeach Donald Trump on realistically because they are crimes, but instead they decided to go for this bogus Ukraine phone call because, just like in 2016, they can't point out things that Donald Trump has actually done that are corrupt, like, stupid things, even like having Secret Service agents stay in his hotels when they visit other countries. A lot of people complain about Trump's bogus charity foundation, which is it's probably a scam, but so was the Clinton Foundation. Everybody knew Hillary Clinton's foundation was a scam and possibly involved in things like human trafficking, for all we know. So it really kind of backfired on the Democrats because it brought up a lot of Joe Biden's baggage came up with that, and it ended up making them look bad, I think. You obviously see, I'm recording this on as the New Hampshire primaries going on, and Biden is currently at the end of the pack, right above like Tulsi Gabbard with 3% or whatever. It didn't work out well for them, but it was another piece of political theater. They wanted to leave some type of black mark on Trump's record or whatever. They wanted to say, this president is technically impeached, and it was a how dare you sir moment of how can you ignore the will of the people. But even when the House began the impeachment proceedings, they knew there was no way that they were going to get it through the Senate. The Republicans control the Senate. They have a majority. That it wouldn't have mattered. Obviously, it didn't matter, and that's why it didn't happen. But if you think about it, the impeachment was a total failure, and I think part of it was a big political show on the part of the Democrats, and it ended up backfiring. It ended up getting their preferred candidate in the single digits. It ended up with Donald Trump having his highest approval rating ever, 49%, which isn't great for a U.S. president, but it is good for him. And you kind of see the establishment Democrats falling apart at this. And I think Trump also had a point when he said, there may have been part of these things with Pelosi planning to hold back delivering the impeachment articles to Congress because she wanted to keep people like a certain senator from Vermont, Bernie Sanders, from having the time to be out on the campaign trail, which obviously Nancy Pelosi is opposed to the Bernie Sanders wing of the Democratic Party, and I think part of that was the motivation to hold the impeachment hearings at this time. I honestly think they were trying to keep Sanders busy. And, unfortunately for them, Sanders has a lot of good surrogates out there on the campaign trail, and it didn't work as well as they want, and he, as far as I'm concerned, he won Iowa, and he's going to win New Hampshire.
Thank you for the answer. What we would like to know about your analysis about the impeachment. Do you think the questions were answered well?
So as far as, if any questions, or how were questions answered during the impeachment process, or were they answered at all, I would say they probably weren't answered at all. Not much really came of it because, again, the focus was so narrow on this, trying to get Donald Trump on this quid pro quo thing, and then maybe some perjury and impeachment or impeachable charges of him lying to Congress or whatever. But none of that really holds up. And again, this was a political theater by the Democrats. I don't think anything was answered because if the Democrats had actually wanted to start talking about corruption and the legalized crime that goes on in Washington D.C., they'd have big trouble on their hands because just like I said previously, just bringing up Ukraine, they immediately involved their assumed frontrunner Joe Biden and started having these questions of corruption surrounding him and his son and all these other things, and they really shot themselves in the foot, as I said, with Hillary in 2016 doing the same thing by pointing out Trump's corruption and then having analogous corruption herself. And you can do that basically with anyone in Washington. I mean, if you turn over any rock, you're bound to find something. So I think that Democrats like Pelosi and them knew that, this was going to be a show. They were going to talk about how Trump was damaging the republic and damaging relations with Ukraine, which the Democrats themselves obviously had a major hand in, with the, starting with Obama and the Euromaidan coup and everything. Democrats had played a major role in facilitating a lot of the corruption in Ukraine, and that's, the farther they, even if they had dug into that subject, the farther they had dug into it, the more they would have really exposed themselves to possible damage. So I don't think anything was answered by it. If you watched any of the hearings, and I'm not sure you did, but if you listened to any of it, it was all a lot of, huff and puff and whatever, but there wasn't much substance to it because the Democrats absolutely can't point out, corruption on the other side. Maybe a few can, obviously, maybe say like a Bernie Sanders or some of the congresswomen such as like Ilhan Omar and maybe Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, some of those who aren't tied to the Democratic establishment. But as far as the Democratic Party elite goes, they can't point out any type of corruption by Donald Trump without there being something exactly like it in their closet. So I don't think we learned anything from the impeachment. I think that maybe Pelosi got what she wanted and she got to lead an impeachment case, which it's a rare thing, and they got to put the mark of impeachment on Trump's presidential record or whatever, and I think she probably considers that an accomplishment. But as I said, I think it's a failure on the Democratic Party's behalf, and I think they'll regret it, especially if they end up going with another candidate tied to the DNC elite who's going to have just as much corruption or baggage attached to them as Hillary Clinton did in 2016. If they end up with a it's not going to be Biden now probably, but a Mayor Pete, an Afghanistan CIA contractor, or even Liz Warren tied to billionaires here, Klobuchar, any possible establishment Democratic frontrunner again has something in their closet that they need to hide, and the Democratic Party can't truly go after the Republican Party, whether it be in elections or in this impeachment, because if there's corruption to point out in the Republican Party, there's just as much to point out in the Democratic Party. So I don't think we learned anything from this whole process, unfortunately. I think we wasted a lot of time, and I think the front-runner of the Democratic Party, who is the anti-establishment candidate, Sanders, was actually locked in the Senate debating over nothing for days, because, frankly, the rest of the party doesn't want him to win. I think this was all a big game in a couple of ways, and the Democrats, the Democratic elite, the establishment liberals, they've lost out. They've shot themselves in the foot, and I think long term, that's a great news, actually. So we can look forward to that. The end of the sort of Clinton consensus is over.
Mr. Kerry, why didn't they let Mr. Bolton to say what he had to say in the process? What is your idea about it?
Okay, so John Bolton, he obviously didn't testify in the Senate impeachment case because the Republicans control the Senate, and there was going to have to be 4 Republicans that would vote with the Democrats in order to allow witnesses to testify in the case. Bolton likely knew that would never happen when he offered to testify. As we've seen from Bolton's past, he is, from the days in the Bush administration where they rushed him through as a recess appointment to be the ambassador of the United Nations, because even a lot of the neoconservatives thought he was too wild. He's not a very popular figure in Washington, but at the same time, he is one of the sort of neocon grandfathers, but he's always looking for his next place to fit in, and part of the place to fit in is with, the resistance Democrats will buy anything. They'll let Steve Bannon be part of the resistance as long as he's talking about, Trump, or if he's saying something about how Trump did something with Russia or whatever, Michael Cohen, Trump's lawyer, can be part of the resistance because he ended up telling the truth about doing crimes for Trump. And Bolton could even be welcomed into the resistance, the liberal resistance, the disillusioned Hillary people and stuff, like the Pelosi types and things like that, because anything that's against Trump is part of the quote-unquote, hashtag resistance that you see on Twitter here. Bolton, and this was no different for Bolton. He had a book coming out. Book sales started skyrocketing once he came out as, saying he would testify. He knew that there would never be 4 Republican senators who were going to vote with the Democrats to allow him or any other, witnesses they didn't want to testify. He knew Trump was going to some extent to stop any witnesses from testifying too, and I think Bolton basically cashed in on that to get himself back in the media. He was out of a job, and the best, as we've seen from a lot of Trump people, what do you do when you're out of a job? You write a book that says bad things about Donald Trump, and there are, I guess, enough, hungry East and West Coast of liberals who will buy that stuff up and make it a New York Times bestseller. And I think, John Bolton, he got what he wanted out of this. He probably will have a best-selling book after making this whole big deal about saying he had dirt on Trump or whatever, because the liberals are so desperate to find dirt on Trump rather than, possibly offering people anything to vote for. everybody knew Bolton wouldn't testify. Bolton himself knew he wouldn't have to testify. This all worked out very well for Bolton. And, everyone knew going into the impeachment in general that the Senate, obviously, the Republican-controlled Senate, Mitt Romney switched sides with his vote, but there was never any way that this was going to go any other way than it did. Trump was always going to get acquitted. There was no way he was going to be removed from office. So Bolton just saw an opportunity to throw his hat into the circus that was going on and make a few quick bucks off it. And, chances are he'll probably make a couple million off it. At the end of the day, he's a snake, and he found a hole, and he went in it, and he used that for a book deal, and he'll continue to find things like this. Guarantee you, this isn't the last we've heard from him. Watch for him next time that, we want to go to war with Iran or something like that. He'll still be on television. Maybe he'll be on liberal networks instead of Fox News now. Who knows? But, whether he's working with the national security liberal elite or with the old neocons from the Bush administration or with whatever you want to call Trump's faction of the Republican Party, Bolton will always find an opening, and the impeachment hearings was just that for him. Maybe the Democrats were duped, but I can't see how anybody ever believed he was going to testify.
Thank you so very much, Mr. Kerry, for all your fruitful answers. Mr. Teshanovich, what do you think about the result of this impeachment? Do you think that the result of this impeachment was in favor of Trump or against him?
And if this was a just world, Trump would be already impeached. But impeached for real reasons, such as continuation of the war in Yemen, war in Syria, and sanctions against Iran that are preventing the arrival of food and medicine to the millions of people. And also, besides that, Trump has committed many, many crimes towards his own domestic population. His main electoral promise was to drain the swamp, but Trump hasn't drained the swamp. Lobbies that are running the White House are even stronger now than they used to be before. Trump has become a part of the swamp. But because the Republican Party and the Democratic Party are part of the same machinery, those questions, the real questions, and the real crimes of Trump won't be mentioned in the impeachment process. And that's why they had a very weak case, because the case against him, the supposed evidence that he decided to tamper with the election campaign by using events in Ukraine, are very, very weak. And they are weak for a reason. The system wants the Obama, the Trump, the Clinton, the Bush, W. None of them would be elected in the first place, and if they weren't in control of the ones who are ruling the United States. And I would like also to mention that every American president so far, before being elected in campaign, he had to make a strong pledge to AIPAC, to Israeli lobby that is very influential in the United States, that he will keep and protect the interests of Israel during his presidency.
Wasn't there any question regarding recent acts of Trump, like pulling out of JCPOA or assassination of General Soleimani and deal of the century, the impeachment, Mr. Teshanovich?
I firmly believe that the purpose of the impeachment process was not to impeach Trump, but to distract American public from the real problems in American society and a destructive American foreign policy. The ones that started the process of impeachment, the members of the Democratic Party knew well, even before the impeachment, that they don't have a majority in Congress, and that without a majority in Congress, any kind of reliable impeachment of Donald Trump would be impossible. So I believe that the main reason why it was started, because both the Republican Party and the Democratic Party in the United States are part of the same system. And one of their main methods of manipulation is dividing the American public into left and right, and making them fight and argue about false arguments and false wars. What do we have now? We have left that is criticizing Trump in all of the non-important aspects without touching the most destructive aspects of the Trump's policy, and that is its imperialist foreign policy and the policy towards the American workers and people. And during the Obama period, you had the right-wing critics of Obama that were criticizing everything about Obama except for the things that he did really wrong, and that is starting 5 wars, even more than Trump. But I believe that the murder of Soleimani was somehow related to the impeachment process. I believe that Trump has done it in order to gain some kind of affection of parts of the Republican Party that are very pro-Zionist and controlled by Israel. And I believe that Soleimani, unfortunately, was main victim of and the only victim of the impeachment process. That Trump had to kill him in order to have a support in Congress by the Republican Party.
How much do you think Trump will have the chance of winning the next election, if you don't mind, Mr. Tashanovich?
Actually, it all depends upon what candidate will the Democratic Party choose to run against Trump. I think that Bernie Sanders or some similar candidate that would have an anti-establishment message could maybe win a battle against Trump in an elections. But what we see in a Democratic Party caucuses in Iowa, the Democratic Party wants to elect a centrist politician. Luckily, Joe Biden is out because he is really a war criminal, and it's very good that he won't be a president of the United States. They want to elect a centrist candidate so he can keep up with all the promises that are made to the donors of the Republican Party. I don't think that Sanders would be any better than Trump, though. I think that Sanders is also a hoax, but I think that he would have a better chance of winning against Trump than the other candidates from the Democratic Party would. But regarding the fact that Trump is very popular among some segments of the American society, he has very, very big chance of being re-elected. And I don't think that his second term will bring any good to the world. I think it will be just continuation of his policies from the first term. I don't know if he wanted or not, but so far he hasn't managed to fulfill any of his promises. He has promised to pull out of Iraq. He has promised to restore the relations with Russia. He had negative statements of NATO before he became president. He has promised many, many very beautiful things, but he has kept none of those promises. And whether he was tricked by the deep states, as some of the Trump supporters wanted us to believe, or he was a hoax from the start, we don't know. We only know the results. And the results at this point are very, very bad, and very, very bad to the rest of the planet.
Thank you so very much for your fruitful and informative discussions and explanations. And we hope to have you both again in this program, Mr. Terry and Mr. Tashanovich, and also thank you very much and goodbye.